Welcome to the Sean Trey Show. I've got a really awesome guest with me today. Now, would you like to tell people who you are and what you do?
You bet. My name is Jed Gilchrist, and I am the owner and operator of Cooper Mountain Sound.
No,
We're a small boutique experience recording and music studio in just outside Portland, Oregon, in a town called Beaverton on Cooper Mountain, which is a 700-foot hill. And we've been open to the public for about a year, and in that time, actually just a little over a year. And in that time, word has spread, and folks are coming out and using the space for all kinds of creative endeavors, and it's really exciting to be a part.
That's awesome. Now, what inspired you to start Cooper Mountain Sound? I mean, it's a beautiful facility,
Yeah.
man. Absolutely stunning. One
Thank
of the
you.
things that drew me to reach out was just I'm going to dive in a little bit because I've recorded at some places that are. My wife's a singer musician, and I do music with her. And we've recorded some places that are, nice, but they don't necessarily make you feel inspired. You know what I mean? And that's where when I saw your studio, it's just this wow experience of just it's so visually inspiring that it must transmit into the music. You can't have that atmosphere without having some inspiration come from it, as my opinion at least.
Well, thank you. I wish I could take credit for that. It really does come down to my parents.
Do tell.
The whole thing was born from, honestly, they moved up to this area in the early '60s, and they had saved and scrimped, and they bought a small farmhouse and a plot of land where they were going to build their dream house. And the A-frame is what they designed and built with their own two hands.
That's awesome.
And as a result, it is not like any other place you've been. They were inspired by A-frame structures that they had seen, and my dad was an engineer of all flavors, and so he did all the calculations himself, and he and his friends would get together on weekends and raise the roof beams or assemble the chimney or put down the floorboards. Like they did everything.
Awesome.
And it just blows me away. I can't even imagine that, hanging out with my friends, and that's what we do for years on end. But in the process of that, they created this beautiful home for the three of us. And they also were inspired by music constantly. My dad was an aspiring singer-songwriter, and my mom would lend harmonies to his recordings and stuff, and he's got scads that he laid down on reel-to-reel over the years. So music was always a part of my life growing up, and it's continued in my own musical endeavors and pursuits, and the relationships that I've built and the concerts I've attended. My life has largely revolved around, in some way, music and appreciation of music. So my mom passed in 2007, unfortunately, and that same year, my dad had a stroke, and so he was a bit incapacitated. And so, to give him the support that he needed, since it's just me, my wife and I talked about it, and we moved up like right next door, and we're wanting to be close to him to help him with whatever he needed: dinner, groceries, helping around the house, and all that. But unfortunately, a few years after that happened, he passed away in 2015. And so when all that was said and done, obviously it was really difficult. But after kind of like the fog of mourning lifted, I was kind of faced with the thought of what do I do with the space,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's I've got my own home, my own family, and I've got this space here that's filled with all these memories and everything else. And I remember sitting at lunch with a colleague, and I kind of had this epiphany in our conversation about, we were talking about what to do with that space. And I had this epiphany about it. And at that same moment, my wife texted me that she had that exact same epiphany, which was, what if we turned this into a space for musicians? What if we turned it into
That's awesome.
a recording studio, a music studio, or whatever? And I'm not big on, universal signs or anything like that, but that felt pretty cosmic to me. And so, I obviously from there I went, okay, what does that actually mean? What do I do with that? I've got a day job and I've got, twin children and a family. So I didn't quite know at first. Obviously, the first order of business was cleaning a lot of stuff out. But soon after that, a friend of mine had befriended a touring band called Other Lives. And they were looking for a spot to record their next record. And a series of conversations later, they saw the place, fell in love with it, and that kind of really launched it into what it's become. They spent about 2.5, maybe 3 years living there, writing, recording the record, and it was recorded, mixed, produced largely in that
That's
space. Awesome. And then when they left, I was like, well, now's the time. Like there's no time like the present. They've molded it into the space that works for them. So with some small adjustments and cleanup, I decided to open it up to the public, and it's been amazing, the support that's come out of
really
that.
cool. Now, how did you get into music? What was the path that carried you down this musical journey?
Well, my parents were definitely a big part of it, like just being exposed to it all the time. I have these memories of on the weekends, my folks would go and visit some close friends of theirs every Saturday. It was like a ritual. We would go into town and hang out at their place from the afternoon to the wee hours of the morning. And it was almost like clockwork. We'd get there, we'd hang out. The kids would go off and play and stuff like that, and the adults would make dinner. We'd all have dinner together, and then soon after dinner, it was always there was a pinochle game, and then there was some music playing. They would get out their guitars and sing and play music for what seemed like hours. Some original compositions, lots of covers. There was a lot of country music was a big part of it, so lots of. They did a lot of Love It, some Merle Haggard, Emmylou Harris, but then so that was, to me, growing up, that just felt normal, and I recognize that that's not.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, it was like, well, yeah, everybody has this, right? Their parents all get together on weekends and play music like that. So it just became very natural for me to, from there. I learned how to play guitar. My dad bought me a guitar, my first, and I still have it. When I was 6 years old, and
That's
it was
awesome.
a grown-up guitar, so I was like,
all stretched out.
I couldn't, yeah, exactly, couldn't quite reach everything. But he started giving me lessons from there, and taught me a couple of songs and chords and things like that. And obviously, it was tough for my little fingers, but it planted that seed.
Mm-hmm.
That was, I stopped playing with it after, a couple of years because I'm growing up and getting into all kinds of regular school kids stuff. And it wasn't quite as interesting. Plus, in school, we had, I was very fortunate to go to a public school that had a music
That's
program.
awesome.
I know that's not a universal experience.
Yeah.
But I tried every instrument I could. So I started with violin, and then I moved on to saxophone, and then I moved on to trumpet, and stuck with trumpet for quite a while.
Yeah.
And so I got some kind of level of formal training with that through understanding how to read music and understanding how to play as a part of an orchestra and become a part of a whole. So that instilled a lot of good practices within me as far as how to be a musician. Mm-hmm. So then, when I turned 10 or 11, I had still not really touched the acoustic, and I was starting to fall in love with the rock and roll. And my cousin, who I look up to, a fellow named John Huckfelt, who has played in tons of bands in the Portland area for years and years. Actually, his birthday was just this last week. Awesome. He bought me this old beat up electric and this sweet tube amp.
Nice.
But I'm still kicking myself for not keeping around. Right. But it was this fantastic kind of proving ground for expanding what skills I'd started to build when I was much smaller. Mm-hmm. And that rekindled my love for guitar. Yeah. And so I would just sit in my room playing along to whatever I could. At the time, it was REM, Pixies, New Order, The Smiths. I was like trying to learn all the chords and play
Yep.
along with the records and things like that. And from there, it was just I found other like-minded folks in school and joined bands and like a lot of other folks. And so it's just been kind of growing from there ever
That's
since.
awesome. That's really awesome. And you know, you hear about like the different seeds that are planted. It's you know it's a common thing that for people there's always going to be the seed that's planted, but it doesn't always mean that it grows right away. You know, some people it
Yeah.
does, but sometimes that seed is planted and it takes years and years for it to come back around before sometimes it's grown into something. And so that's really interesting that you said that you got the guitar at 6, but then it was years later that it kind of came back. That's really awesome.
Yeah.
And you're not
I'm so glad it
yeah,
did.
right.
Like, I probably would really regret, like, if I had just gotten that and let it be. But something about the way music has been part of really my DNA, I just don't think that would even be possible. Like, whether it was a guitar or whether it was the trumpet. I also taught myself drums after that. I wound
That's
up
awesome.
um, like mowing lawns and buying a used drum kit, a 5-piece Ludwig, out of the classified ads in the newspaper over the course of a summer when I was like in ninth grade, I think it was. And like I just there's something about music and the creation of it, and even just playing covers that just it's like my zen,
Yeah,
and it always has been.
yeah. And I like that comment that it's your zen. I find that it's my head gets into stuff, and when I try to meditate, I love meditation. It calms me down, but I still stay in my head. But one of the time when I play guitar, everything turns off, and I'm just in it, and I'm enjoying the
Yes.
song, and I am playing, and I see like the great guitar masters, and they're at this, like, you see their face, and it's like this point of rapture, of pure ecstasy, and it's just
Absolutely.
like I've never been there. I've always wanted to be there, but when I watch it, it to me is like this spiritual awakening of sorts that these people are in. It's this powerful present moment awareness that is kind of what we all should be aspiring towards in ways. It's just beautiful.
And it's fleeting. Like
Yeah,
it never lasts long. I can't spend, like, just physically can't spend all my time in that
yeah,
state, and so it makes you appreciate it that much more when you attain it. And usually, you only recognize it's happening after the fact, right? Ideally, you don't notice it in the
yeah,
moment, but you step away from one of those fugue states, and you're like, "Whoa, that was I just 3 hours just melted away," and that was it's like it recharges you.
yeah. That's so point. The time does melt away, and it does leave you like yeah, recharged and exhausted at the same time,
Yeah,
which is
totally,
beautiful.
totally.
Now,
Yeah.
how did you then transition from learning to play music to getting into running a studio? How did you make that transition?
I think I'm still working on making that
Right?
transition. I I that same cousin, John. Um, Again, he's been active in the Portland music community for going on 40 years now, and in the early aughts, he secured a rehearsal space in Portland. Um, and then he secured it with his own funds and put his name in the line and the whole bit. And then he reached out to his wide musician network, and I was fortunate enough to be one of the folks he reached out to, say like, "Hey, I've set up this spot. I'm calling it the Restless Native Studio Collective, and wonder if you want to be a part of this." And so basically, he had these slots, these 4-hour slots, all throughout the week that he was subletting out to musicians, and he created this incredible space that was 2 rooms, one that was a control room and one that was just all instruments, and it had like a house drum kit and bass and cabinets and the whole bit. And that was my first taste of, like, being hands-on with what a studio environment could be like. Stepping back a little bit, my childhood band progression wound up reaching its zenith in high school when my band Tasty Fish,
Awesome, man.
with my bandmates and I are still good friends. Uh, we wound up like deciding we'd gotten together and played a bunch and recorded a bunch of songs. We played like the high school battle of the bands and stuff like that. It was super fun, and we were like, "Hey, let's figure out what it takes to make a record." And we just were like the right mix of people with initiative and drive to like support each other and make it happen. I don't even know how we found the guy, but we found this fellow who lived out in the country, had his own studio, and for I think it was $18 an hour, we took several sessions actually, and laid down all the tunes that we had written to that point, and we tracked them individually and added the effects and all that. And I remember, obviously playing was the one thing, but then you go in the control room and he does the playback. And the moment that I heard the stuff that we were playing with like clean levels, and it was probably a super rough mix at the time, but clean levels, nice balance, just a touch of reverb. And it was like, oh my God, we sound amazing. Yeah. It was like this, it was like so exciting. Right. And that kind of sparked an interest in, okay, what's different between what happened in that room and what I'm hearing in this room? And that, again, planted a seed, kind of a theme here, right? So when John created this space, and I wound up signing up for a Friday night, 6 p.m. to 10 p.m., and I had that slot from, I think, 2006 until, unfortunately, in 2013 when the landlords closed up shop and sold to a developer. R.I.P. So sad. But for that amount of time, I had this like 4 hours of meditative space where it was just my time to do whatever. Mm-hmm. And, obviously creative inspiration is also a fleeting thing. And it took a while for me. Like I did a lot of, I'm an only child, so I've always done a lot of introspection. And so, but like there was a lot of self-discovery about my creative process in that, recognizing that you can't always schedule inspiration. And I'm sure that this is an obvious statement.
Something that was talked about yesterday in the podcast as well, which is really interesting. Like people were talking about that, how you can't schedule inspiration, and that inspiration and creativity is cyclical. It comes and goes.
Yeah. And I remember getting so frustrated about that. There were times when I would get in there. My usual mode of operation, I would get out the guitar and play some songs that I like to play, that covers, and I might start to lay down a guitar lick of something new or a drum lick and kind of see where it went from there. But there were times when I just didn't feel like doing anything, and I would beat myself up like I'm paying for this time and this space, and what am I doing? And I kind of came full circle and started to recognize that no, that's okay. This is I'm paying for the space to be creative, and it's not always going to happen, and that's okay. But it's really hard to accept that. However, in the process of having like this playground at my disposal, I was able to dabble in things like, what is it like to set up a mic and mic drums? And that sounds like crap. What if I move it over here? And why is that? Which then led me to Google information and go to the library and check out books on proper recording techniques. And so being naturally curious, I think it just drove me to want to learn more and want to be better.
Yeah.
And so that kind of, when this opportunity presented itself, I had kind of that foundation. And definitely I am by no means an expert. And I also am smart enough to know when I'm out of my depth. So the plan with my vision for this spot is I want to make it accessible to musicians and make it so that you don't have to spend thousands of dollars to get a good sounding recording.
I love that.
I want it to be something that anyone could walk in with nothing in their hands and walk out with a recording that they're proud of, whether it's one song or a full album. And that could be, I could be involved or I could be not involved. I want it to be, they could bring all their own gear, the entire recording setup. They could bypass mine and just use theirs and all their own instruments, or use everything that I've put there. But I want the space to be 100% flexible so that it doesn't, there's no restrictions to the art, kind of hearkening back to this space that I had access to, because it was like, these are things I had never touched a physical soundboard before, and here I am with 24 channels on this massive board, right. And I'm like, what do these things do? Like, I want people to be able to explore and grow in this space that I've created.
Well, there's something they were pointing out too that I really love. That I've had some multiple discussions with people recently, how I think that you pointed out that your school had a music program, and I love that. And I'm tending to think we have it all wrong with schools right now. And as I have a 6-year-old daughter, and I'm looking at, I've been homeschooling the last 2 years because of COVID, and now we're looking at, as things are normalizing again, and I'm really thinking about, where I want to put her for school, because we don't have enough schools that focus on exploration and play, and we have way too much just crap that's taught, that's absolutely unnecessary. And it was interesting because I was doing a homeschool program out of Australia, and it was great. And but when we got to the geography section, it was like the whole year was geography of Australia, and I'm like, well, we don't live in Australia, so it's not applicable. And it's not that it was bad information; it's great information. But for so many people and so many things, I think that we don't always have the right information presented to us. And even if we do, we don't have the chance to explore the information. And I think that that's where this space that people can come into, and they can just go nuts, literally, like, go nuts, go and check it out, create, because, and I think this is something I'm starting to ask creatives that come in. How? Because for me, I'm a creative as well, but I've also worked in an industry where you have clients that are requiring you to get stuff done, and it's challenging. How do you balance these two worlds? A world where you're acting upon inspiration and creativity, and a world on the flip side that expects things to be done on time. It's a real challenge, and I'm curious how other people kind of balance these two opposites. How do you approach that?
I've definitely struggled with that because, and I've got a day job totally unrelated to music to pay the bills, but I also do some session work for friends and bands that need it, and obviously that anytime you're making a commitment, the follow through on that commitment is of utmost importance. Whether it's free or you're getting paid, like your integrity is on the line there. So I take it very seriously, but you also are running up against exactly that. The inspiration wall can just sometimes be there. So for me, the only real strategy I've employed is, again, hearkening back to the restless native days, carving out that space, and making it as routine as possible, so that you can lull yourself into almost a pattern of productivity.
I like that. Lulling yourself into a pattern of productivity. I like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's just my own meanderings, but it's what I've found. Like for me, being a father of 9-year-old twins and a husband and multiple pets, there's a lot of demands. So my time that I've got every week is basically when the boys get up and they've got their allocation of screen time in the morning. My wife's still resting, so I'll just have like probably 2 or 3 hours of creative time on Saturday and Sunday. That's it. Everything else is stolen, but during every week, that's pretty much the time I can rely on. And having that time has and consistently trying to sit down and do something with it is the other part of that puzzle,
Yeah.
and or the other for me, the other part of training myself, so that you are again creating that pattern for yourself. So whether it's mixing a client's album, or creating a loop of my own, or working on something that I put together a while ago and needs some polishing, whatever it is, my commitment is I'm going to do something that is related to a creative pursuit. And for me, that's largely music. So that has helped a lot. That's allowed me to follow through on the session commitments that I've had, although obviously playing trumpet on a Saturday or Sunday morning, not particularly attractive with my family. So that becomes a little trickier. But I've also, like the mixing and mastering commitments I've got, that's when I knock those out. And that's that's allowed me to kind of keep that balance between the capricious creative inspiration and when it chooses to strike, and like the fixed life of responsibility that's at odds
Yeah,
with that.
because granted, I wish we all had an unlimited amount of funds to just do whatever the hell we wanted to do. But we most of us have to balance a world where, and this is one of the things too, like I love interviewing people that are on all spectrums of the creative work world, because it's like, granted, you get you know, your Billie Eilishes that, they get into music and they become a professional at 13, and then it's just like, that's their whole life. But for a lot of us, that wasn't it, and that you have to find
Yeah.
ways to nurture that seed, because granted, plants that aren't watered do not grow, and I think that,
Right.
we have to come back to, and so I love that idea of you have this space and this time that is just set aside for that, because I'm the daughter of a 6-year-old, and I have a wife, who has a very busy career that I help support with her stuff, and then I have my own work that I'm doing and my podcast that I'm developing, and it's tricky because one of the things that I find, I've got this huge to-do list, but I have to really focus in on what actually is important right now, because not all of it is. And if I can
Yep.
really look at that and go, what is my actual priority today? And if I can really hone in on that and figure that out, there's a lot that I can do with that, and
Yeah.
sometimes,
It's
sometimes it's not, sorry, sometimes it's not what I thought
all
it
right.
was, sometimes the
Sure.
priority that is actually over here when I thought it was going to be here.
Yeah. I have found multiple times, um, and I've learned to kind of cope with it. You start rat holing on something, like you get obsessed with that this track isn't working out just right. Let me take another cut at it. Another cut, and you've spent, an hour and a half trying to get that one lick just right. And I've had to stop myself multiple times when I find myself hyper focused on a detail or on a specific outcome, going like, okay, have I spent enough time on this right now? Am I neglecting other
Yep.
things that I'm going to regret that I'm not spending time on? So having that periodic check in with yourself to go like, am I spending the right amount of time on this, and that's going to make me
Yep.
happy in the end? Because that's what matters, right? You want to feel satisfied about what you're doing and how you're spending your time. So it feels like regular check-ins with yourself is an important part of that
And
process.
I think one thing you're pointing out, and I really like, is sometimes you have to step away to come back to it. Like my
Yeah.
daughter, she just started studying piano, and so, and she's doing great. She loves it, and she gets in. And we were working up, and she had, it was like 8 pages of homework from the teacher, and it was great practice. When we got to page 7, she was starting to wear down, and and
Mm,
she started making the same mistake again and again, and she's very motivated like me, and she didn't want to quit. She's like, I want to get this. And I
mhm.
looked at her and I said, sometimes we have to step away. Sometimes you need
Yeah.
to take a break, and then, or you just change up the energy. So we walked away, we got a glass of water, and I had made some fresh fruit juice popsicles. We had a quick popsicle, and she came back and she knocked it out, and it wasn't a problem. But it was
Nice.
like, and I mean,
You
it's
know,
an example of a child, but man, that happens to us adults at the same time,
oh,
all the
absolutely,
time. Sometimes you need to step away.
yeah, yeah. Whether it's ear fatigue or
Yeah.
mental
Yep.
fatigue, or it's like you're getting stuck on something that you're hearing things that aren't really there. That moment of okay, got to take a break is so important. Not just with creative stuff too. Like I think we don't give ourselves enough room for breaks. And it's funny with my day job, um, the pandemic work from home lifestyle has eroded what little breaks that we
Right.
have accustomed ourselves to
Right.
during the workday because everyone can just be available whenever you click something you can start a conversation. So meetings now are just back to back to back, and there's no movement from room to room. And I feel like that's the fatigue that people are experiencing is partially due to
Yeah.
that. Like now scheduled ourselves out of whatever brief mental break we were giving ourselves in the first place.
And that was one of I have a remote job that I do that is, which I like. I really enjoy it. I enjoy being able to work from home, but and I'm working with people in different time zones. I really have to tell
Mm,
myself now is off time. This is family time. I'm done for the day. And at night, phone's on airplane mode because people in other time zones are not necessarily, sleeping at the same time I am. And I have to tell myself, I put in my time today. Nothing else can be accomplished. And nothing else is important at this point in time because everything
yeah,
in the world, feel like there's so much that we get coming into our lives that people come in and go, this is the most important thing in the world at this moment. And most often it's not. Most often,
yeah,
like they might be overreacting as well. If you can step back and let things calm down, there's often a lot more kind of flow that comes in, which again comes back
yeah,
to the creativity cyclical. Sometimes you got to
yeah,
step back and out of the way and let things kind of just realign.
absolutely. Yeah, that's I'm finding that letting go of some of the preconceived notions of what creative pursuits need to produce has led to giving more space for that flow and that zen to happen. But when I was growing up, a lot of us grew up listening to music that kind of propagated the the myth of the rock star kind of thing.
Yeah.
And for the longest time, my head was around that's the only way you can make a living in music is if you are on the stage performing and you're drawing in the crowds and you're cranking out the albums, et cetera, et cetera. And as time has gone on, and especially as I've opened my eyes to all of the supporting roles that are involved, and obviously having Cooper Mountain Sound brings us right to the forefront. There's so many other
Yeah.
ways that you can make a living, and you don't have to necessarily make your primary living doing music. Um, I know a lot of folks that this is a side hustle for them, and it's the thing that gives them joy because it's their
Yeah.
passion. Um, and that's good. That's good enough. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's not. You don't have to be Billie Eilish. you
Right.
can you can just be yourself and um, have those bursts of creative flow and make a little money doing what you love to do, and that can kind of recenter you and make you happier and a better, more kind of well balanced person in all aspects of your life. So resetting that expectation has helped me like understand what motivates me and what I expect to get out of spending my Saturday and Sunday mornings making music. I don't ever intend to have a top 10 single that I'm going to be able to retire on or something like that. I think that was my dad's motivation to some degree. The more I've learned in retrospect, being outside of thinking of it with adult eyes, and I think he really was thinking of it almost as well, I'm good at music, so let me see if I can write a hit song, and then that's my financial plan, which I love him for. But that's just, for me, recognizing that that is not the only means
Yeah.
to success and happiness when it comes to music has been liberating.
Well, I think that, everyone wants to be, everyone wants a great lottery ticket. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
I would love to win the Mega Millions, a couple, like $500 million jackpot. I would definitely be very happy with that. And like anyone who says money can't buy happiness, I hear you, but it really goes a long way toward making your life not suck.
Yeah,
It's like
it's true.
you can go and you put money where you want it. You can go and see the world. You can do what you want to do, but money's not everything. Granted, but yet I feel like so often, we are conditioned to think that unless you hit, so there's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. These are all different levels of just life. You know what I mean? People feel like if you don't hit 10, you haven't made it. And so many people don't realize that maybe you're living at an 8. An 8's beautiful. And I mean, and maybe, and that's not up and down, like 10 is good and 0 is bad. Like, I'm just saying they're just different flavors of coffee. It's like, one's a coffee, one's a cappuccino, one's a mocha, and they're just different, and you can be the mocha guy if you want to be a mocha guy. You don't have to be drinking espresso, and I think that people learning to identify their own creative space and their own creative passion, is really important, because maybe you have a hit single, maybe you don't. Either way, you still are a musician and you still are creating. And at the end of the day, that's where it's at,
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's the act of creating. And I'll admit, like listening to some stuff that I've done, so it's really satisfying to go like, I mean, was that the best thing I've ever heard? No, but there's some moments in there like, wow, I'm really proud of that.
Right.
And that feels good.
That's awesome. And that's where it's at. Now, if you could go back in time and talk to a younger version of yourself, what advice would you give yourself?
I think I would, focusing strictly on the music side of things, it would be to don't be afraid to take lessons. I think that I had this chip on my shoulder about taking private lessons for trumpet, guitar, what have you, aside from what my dad did to kind of get me started. But I never studied under any teachers one-on-one. Everything I got was from the large public school experience. And I honestly didn't practice that much either. I practiced guitar and drums because I loved to play them. But you could also, I always found too that aside from the enjoyment of the action of doing those things, you can make more of a complete song. Obviously not drums, but trumpet is for me was tougher because it's really hard to hear a full song when you've got one voice, and so it wasn't as satisfying to practice by yourself. Guitar is a totally different thing. You could play whole songs and hear everything, and so it was a chore, and thus I didn't do it. So I would probably tell myself, practice more. Don't disregard the scales, because I feel like I'm only later in life am I really recognizing like, oh, that's why my instructors kept having us do the scales, like as you're using it as a tool for improvisation. And being more comfortable with theory and things like that. Like, just don't be afraid to spend the time and do the work outside of the classroom setting is probably the thing I would have myself do.
Right. I think that that lack of understanding of how important these things are later. You could find it in other areas too. The person who goes back and never went to the gym, and then years later they're like, wow, I really wish I had stayed in shape. You know what I mean? Right. Or the person who, for me, I wish I had a practiced piano as a kid. I really, really wish I'd have stuck with it, just for the understanding of music theory, the musical foundations of everything, how much easier it would be to write music now, because not having, and I granted I love guitar, but the piano really is, because if you can play keyboard, you can apply it to any type of instrument. You know what I mean? With
Yep.
modern DAWs and virtual instruments, it's amazing. And I just wish I had practiced more. And
Yeah.
and it's not that I'm sad or I regret it, but I didn't understand that
Right.
that time that I was put in would come back to me. And maybe it's like, I was reading this thing, like there was this financial Instagram account that I followed, and they said if you put this X amount of money into your account every month, this is what it looks like after 50 years. And I was looked at it, it was an insane amount of money, and it wasn't much that they were depositing, but because of compounding interest of what you were getting back, it was becoming substantial. And I think the same thing is true for the time that we invest in little things in our life. You don't
Yep.
see where those seeds, and it comes back to planting seeds. These are all seeds that we
Yep.
are planting in our life. Like, what are you planting and what are you watering?
Yeah. And routine and kind of self conditioning too. Like whether it's exercise or financial savings or practicing an instrument. Um, after you set aside the time and been consistent about it for X number of weeks, it gets easier. But getting over that hump,
Yeah.
right? Whether it's eating right or working out or whatever, getting over that hump is the part where we all tend to fall
Yeah.
down. Uh, but it really does become so much easier once you have made it just a routine. We're creatures of habit,
Yeah.
and we can use that to our own advantage.
Well, and I think that, what I notice, I'm a huge, huge proponent of routines. And like I get up, I do the same thing. And even on my days off, I try to stick with the same routine because
Hmm.
it just allows me to feel more productive with my own stuff. And I try to keep my daughter, like, we had some people that we were, a couple members of my family were down sick this week. And so, we still got up and we still had our routine. And my daughter was like, why are we still doing our routine when people are sick? And I was just like, because it helps us find meaning. At least it helps me.
Yeah,
It helps me find
yeah,
meaning. When I don't have that, I feel kind of lost at times. So,
yeah. And it's so funny, like the younger, more anti-authoritarian me, would push against that
right.
kind of notion. But it's 100% true, and maybe it's just me being in the 40s, and but it's just like, yeah, like there is not just comfort, but like there's having that
Yeah.
foundation of the times that you have specific activities and what to expect from them frees you up to really uh, get more out of
Yeah.
them individually. It seems.
So true. Well,
It was funny you
go
mentioned
ahead.
a bit of a digression, but you
I
mentioned
love
about
digressions.
you mentioned about guitar versus piano. I started becoming obsessed with synthesizers about 15 years ago now, and I've built started with soft synths and started to get into analog gear, and then I started to go down the Eurorack rabbit hole and everything. So
Oh.
that's a whole realm that I go down. But I also started to, as part of that, just before the pandemic struck, actually, I was like, you know what? I have never actually. I can noodle on a piano and I can play a melody line and stuff like that, but I've never actually learned how to properly play chords and everything. So I started to, get more serious about taking online lessons and guidance and everything like that. It's probably the closest thing I've taken to lessons. But what I have found is that on the guitar, each instrument seems to have its own compositional tendency,
Yeah.
and so you a song that I have written on the guitar tends to have kind of a lot of the same kind of chord structures, and one chord leads to another, and it's totally different from stuff that I write on a piano.
Mm.
Um, and so I've kind of a fun way uh, to unlock new possibilities is taking something I've written on the guitar, but use those chords and play them on a piano and vice versa. Because then you kind of like play with those ruts, those creative tendencies, and make something a little more interesting out of both.
Well, and that's an interesting point because when I find I play with guitar, I when I write songs in the guitar, I'll stick toward chords that are, and I know this sounds silly, but that are easier to play. You know,
Sure,
and
yeah.
stuff that's familiar, and the hand position's not so wild because it's easier.
Yeah.
And I wonder how other people find that. And versus the piano, I've never thought about that. It's like, well, it's like, imagine you have a hammer and a screwdriver, right? When you have a hammer, you're planning on hitting things. And so if you are
Sure.
approaching a situation, you're going to approach it with the idea that this tool works this way. And a screwdriver has a different use, though they both hold things together. They bind things together.
Yeah.
They do it in fundamentally different ways. And I think that the instruments are a similar thing. They approach music in fundamentally different ways. And people have a habitual way of using them. And, and it's interesting that you said that
Exactly.
because totally, I use the same chords all the time. And you look at like some of the great bands, they had their things that they went to. Like they would go to the same sound all the time,
Sure.
and it was that band's sound.
Yeah, and it sounds good. Like the reason I keep writing the way I do is like I enjoy what I'm
Yeah.
creating, but you also after a while you want to kind of break free and try to blaze a new trail, and sometimes it's hard to break free from that when you're working within that instrumental construct that you find yourself in.
My when we go from the airport back to my house, here in Saigon, and if it's my father-in-law driving, he takes the exact same route every single time. He never deviates from his route. It's the same place. And in life, but yet there's hundreds of different ways that you can go. There's so many. And I remember once that we took a taxi back and the guy went a very different way. And I was like, we can go this way? And it was just like mind blown because I was so used to the way my father-in-law would drive because he would pick us up whenever we flew in. And it was just we all get into the rut of the way we approach things. And it's not wrong. It's not wrong.
Sure.
But it's just one way of doing something. And there are more ways to do things. And so it's really interesting to hear that as well because, and it's interesting. I wonder if you gave great musicians a different instrument, to approach, what would their signature sound come out like, and so, what would happen if you gave Jimi Hendrix a piano and said, hey, we want you to construct music here, or what happens if you give Billy Joel a guitar,
Yeah.
So just,
that's a cool idea.
It's a different way to look at things, different lenses.
For sure.
Now, if you could, if you had Aladdin's lamp, what would you wish for?
I mean, aside from all the typical infinite wishes and all that, gosh, man, that is tough. My mind immediately goes to things that are, solving universal problems, right? But thinking selfishly, if I were just focused on myself, probably just that my family and I would have the stability, the security and stability financially and everything else to know that everything's going to be okay, that health-wise and money-wise, and so we can focus on spending our time here in the pursuit of happiness and fulfillment.
I like that.
Because I think we spend a lot of time, all of us, but my family as well, thinking about, decisions are often gauged by financial risk that's associated or security risk or what have you. And I think it's, thinking of my kids, like there's things that they need to contend with being kids in modern America, like lockdown drills and stuff like that, that I wish they didn't even have to think
Yeah.
about. And I wonder how much it's hampering their development and overall life. So I wish that for everyone, not just my family. But if I'm thinking selfish, that'd be the focus.
Beautiful answer, man. Well, I wanna say I really appreciate your time tonight. This has been insightful, and it's
Cool,
always
man.
awesome to hear and gain new perspectives because what was it? There was that one quote, I can't remember it exactly, but it's like be kind to everyone because you don't know what journey they're walking or what struggle they're carrying. And when I talk to people and I hear their stories, it gives me a little bit more level of empathy for myself because I can sit there and hear stories told that are like make me realize, wow, we are all human, and the
Yeah.
beauty of that is that we live, we love, and we try to figure out what the hell we're doing. I appreciate it,
I hope I can figure it out someday
right?
for
It'd
sure.
be nice to be nice. You ever remember City Slickers, the old
Yeah,
Billy
yeah.
Crystal movie? There was that great line where he's like, "What's the meaning of life?" And it was it Jack Palance or something? Jack
Pallets?
Palance is like,
Yeah.
I think it's this, and then he died, which is awesome. And like they're finally to figure out, like what is this? Well, and at the end of the movie, Billy Crystal says, "Well, this it's different for everyone, and this thing is meaning of life is whatever you make it, man."
For sure.
So I hope so.